going? So Ezra chapter 7. Ezra 7. When you guys were preparing for it, did you feel the whiplash? As we fast forward 57 years between the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7, it's almost as bad as chapter 4. Anyways, this is where we're at today. We've got our timeline of the book of Ezra, moving into Ezra leaving Babylon, coming to Jerusalem down there in the 458s. Temple is finished. Well, kind of. Temple's functionally finished, we'll put it that way. They're still doing stuff, but functionally finished and able to be utilized in the worship of God. We talked about that last time in Ezra 6. So let's talk about what's going on in world history. We're fast forwarding that 500 to 458 time period. This is when Rome begins to become an issue in Italy. This is the time period where the Greco-Persian wars are starting to happen. So that's Darius invading and failing, Xerxes invading and failing. The 300 Spartans happened during this time period. 458, Leonidas probably died, I don't know, another maybe 30 years earlier. Probably not even that much. Yeah, 480, I got it up there. So 22-ish years earlier. So it's very recent to that time period. Herodotus is the primary historian during this time period. Sophocles is shouting his irritating questions to anybody who would listen. The Greek culture is starting to move. This is one of the things I think we need to realize is Alexander the Great is the one who's going to bring Greek dominance to the most of that Mediterranean area, moving off into Persia all the way until you get to India. But during this time period, we're going to see the Greek culture starting to encroach. They're starting to move into that eastern half of the Mediterranean. Athens is going to be involved in one of the wars between Persia and Egypt. That's down there, 458. You can see it at the bottom. Athens comes to their assistance. So Greek troops are now setting foot in this part of the world. First time Greeks have been there probably since, at least en masse, since the Philistines moved in way back when. Okay. So that's the time period we're talking about. This is what's going on. Notice this period is going to provide a pretty good amount of peace for Canaan region. Persia's wars are going to the north. They're going through Turkey. They're crossing over. They're hitting Tyre and sailing, but they're not coming down into Jerusalem area. They're moving off towards the Greeks, Darius and Xerxes both. Artaxerxes takes the throne just before the 458s, which is the time period that we're looking at here with Ezra. Any questions on what's going on in the world? So what's about to happen, yes. Oh, the 3-month investigation, that's what we're going to talk about in the next couple. Yes, that's chapter 8. Well, that's chapter 9 and chapter 10. Ezra comes back and spends 3 months figuring out what's been going wrong. And the primary one we're going to talk about is the intermarriage. That's in 2 weeks. So we're not concerning ourselves there, but that's what's coming. This is our timeline. All right. So, prophets. Over the next couple of classes, because I only got 3 left, I think, after this one. 8, 9, 10. Yes, 3. We're going to be referencing into Joel and referencing into Malachi. Joel is in that dead period, the 500 to 458. He's in that middle at some point. He does his prophesying. But Malachi traditionally has been the ending. And so we're going to start bringing him in because if you notice the 458, 460 is right around that time period, and we'll talk about what he has to preach on probably not next week, but the week after. All right. I keep forgetting to take these out. Well, I don't want to take them all out. I just don't want to be animated every time. All right. I want to put this list back up just to re-emphasize the amount of time that is passing. Work on the temple stops at the death of Cyrus, going all the way back to the beginning of chapter 4. That's in 530. Temple is finished being built in 516, and now we're fast forwarding to the 450s. So Ezra and Nehemiah especially starts coming in about 444. Ezra's there before him. All right, Ezra chapter 7, 458. Let's go ahead and turn to the text. We will probably spend the majority of our time taking a look at Ezra 7. It is another letter written politically, and I will love it. You will tolerate it because I'm teaching. But at the end, I want to spend a little time talking about the development of the Talmud again. We're going to be looking at what the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Gemara are all coming together to say about superstitions during that time. I call them superstitions. They would have called them magic. But that tends to provoke a different thought in our day and age. Ezra 7, verse 1. After this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, the son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Merioth, the son of Zariah, son of Uzi, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. Whew. I'm not reading it again. Why is this genealogy here? What do you think? He's in Aaron's line, number 1. So this is going to set him in a class that is separate from what other group of people? There's a few answers you can give to that one. Political leaders, they can come from any tribe, primarily Judah, but any tribe during this time. He's going to be separate there.
High priest.
Yep.
This shows that there's finally someone who is in that line.
Yes. We do have that. He's not going to function as high priest, though. Jeshua's going to stay there because he's the one that has, which one was it? Haggai. No, Zechariah deals with and gives him the glory. They're going to leave that with him and his line. So, but Ezra may be coming in as Jeshua's getting old during this time period, if not already dead. I mean, it is 50 years later. Levites, separates him out of the average Levite. I want you to think about what group of people are being developed out of the fact that they went into captivity and had no priests. But they still needed to know the law. So I'm thinking of a New Testament word that is sometimes called to Jesus and sometimes called to other individuals that becomes a great teacher of the law. What word is that? Rabbi. Remember, one of the huge arguments that is going on during this time period is who is allowed to teach the law. In the first 5 books of the Law of Moses, it establishes that that responsibility is given to Levites and to priests, and especially given to the lineage of Aaron. They go off into captivity, and that kind of goes out the window. What's the point of a priest if you don't have a tabernacle? What's the point of a priest if you don't have a temple? What's the point of a priest if you don't even have a burnt offerings altar? There is no purpose for a priest then. So then people begin to wonder, can anybody learn the law? About 5 weeks ago now, I don't know, sometime earlier in the class that I've been teaching since April, we discussed how they were beginning to decide which, let me rephrase all of this. They were beginning to decide what the law and what the writings of God mean to the Jews. Prior to going into captivity, we don't have like 1st and 2nd Kings is not fully compiled. It's just some histories. 1st, 2nd Samuel's not really compiled during that time period. It's just some histories. They really only have the first 5, and most Jews are not very familiar with it. Read the histories. They just don't learn it. They lose it for a period of time in Judah. So in captivity, they're trying to decide how important is it, and how important is it to which tribe. Levites would have always considered it important. So they came up with some concepts that either they are married to the law of God, the words of God, or it is a possession. So from that, came our discussion that we really spent some time on is a Gentile allowed to learn the law? And their answer is no. It is against the law. He should be killed if he attempts to learn the law of Moses, because either it's adultery or it's theft. Now, that does not limit it to the Levitical learning of the law, the Levites and the priests. That broadened it. Anybody could learn. Now we're bordering on sin of Jeroboam. Sin of Jeroboam is you can worship in Dan, you can worship in Bethel, anybody can be a priest, anybody can worship God. You don't need any special lineage. So we're reorienting ourselves. Ezra comes onto the scene and very powerfully demonstrates what side of the camp he is on with this lineage. He is not just a nobody. He is setting down, I am going back to the beginning rules. So that's the party that he is going to belong to. Any comments on that? You guys know I like the politics, and this is nothing more than religious politics right here. Cool. Verse 6. Ezra went up from Babylonia. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord was with him. So that's their summary, verse 6. We're going to talk about most of what verse 6 kind of talks about, and verses 7 and 8 kind of talks about in chapter 8. The actual traveling, how they traveled, who they traveled with, all of that's chapter 8, so set it outside of your mind. We're going to talk about it next week. But we are going to be reading the letter that Artaxerxes sends. So let's get the few verses down there. In verse 7, there went up also to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king some of the people of Israel, some of the priests, some of the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, the temple servants. Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which is in the 7th year of the king. On the first day of the 1st month he began to go. On the first day of the 5th month he arrives, for the good hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. Again, the terminology being used here is that war of what will the Jews be? Will they go back to a polytheistic point of view where gods are all over the place? There's a variety of them, and if you want to worship one over another, that's your business. That's really their stance up until captivity. Ezra doesn't like that. And Ezra's stance is, I study the law. I study the law only. I am here to do it, to teach it, and to establish its rulership in Israel. Any questions on that? Or comments? Or thoughts? Cool. Most of those discussions are going to happen in chapter 8 and chapter 9 as Ezra actually arrives. So, let's talk about the letter King Artaxerxes sends along with Ezra. I want to make one comment here. Ezra chapter 4, you guys remember there's a letter in Ezra chapter 4, and every time that I talk about it, I want to pull the beard hair out of the guy who put it there because it's awful. Ezra chapter 4's letter is around 444 BC, just around the time Nehemiah is about to come. So the conflict we're going to read about in July, when I start in on Nehemiah, the conflict that Nehemiah is having in chapter 1, where he's wounded in his soul, the work in Jerusalem is not going well, my people are suffering, he is in direct response to the Ezra 4 letter. That is not the same time period Ezra's talking about. Ezra happens a little bit before that, 458. You guys do the math, because I didn't write it down, so I can't. That's a little bit before. This letter is the one that allows additional work to continue. The Ezra 4 letter stops the work. Nehemiah comes to restart the work. Everybody got your timelines in your mind? Good? Okay. I'm only going to probably talk about that like 12 more times. Okay. Verse 11, this is the copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra the priest, the scribe, a man learned in matters of the commandments of the Lord and his statutes for Israel. Artaxerxes the king of kings, to Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, peace. Some of yours might say perfect. The Aramaic means perfect. They think it might be just like a peace be with you kind of comment. They don't know. So we got Artaxerxes, King of Kings. That's pretty typical. But the Ezra title I want to spend a moment on. It says, this letter is given to Ezra, the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven. That phrase, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, is what I want to talk about. Because there are other Persian individuals who have a title very similar. They might have the title, the scribe of the law of Dagon, or the scribe of the law of Ananiah, or the scribe of the law of insert next god. What we know is all of those individuals with exactly the same title held political office inside of the Persian Empire. They were consulted as primary deities of the Persian Empire, as deities that had to be paid attention to. And if you don't pay attention to them, awful things happen to the Persians. So Ezra, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, holds political office. And seemingly, Artaxerxes asks his opinion sometimes, if Artaxerxes treats him as he does all of the others with this title. Sometimes I think we miss that, because if you just read over it, he's a scribe of the law of the God of heaven. That's just words. But when we take a look at the other titles the Persians had, he's probably a political title. So Nehemiah being the cupbearer, Esther is married into the family, would have been the previous guy, Xerxes probably. We've got Mordecai with a high position of power just before the reign of Artaxerxes coming in. We have Ezra in a religious position. We have Daniel about 50, 60 years earlier with his political position inside of the Babylonian and then the Persian Empire. And what we're seeing is that the Jews in exile are not really oppressed. They're in exile. They still hold political power. They still get in the way. They still create enemies, and Haman comes along. You don't get angry at people who have no political power. You get angry at people who have political power. And Haman wants to kill them. There's a reason Haman wants them gone. It's because they're in the way. Okay. Any comments on that? I think it's also very interesting that Artaxerxes writes his letter, sends it with his official representative of the God of heaven. Then he writes another letter and says, stop all work. And then he writes a letter and says, no, go and do the work. And he sends it with his cupbearer. We're talking about powerful Persian officials coming through, named Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, let's read his letter. Peace. And now, verse 13, I make a decree that anyone of the people of Israel or their priests or their Levites in my kingdom who freely offers to go to Jerusalem may go with you. For you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to make inquiries about Judah and Jerusalem, according to the law of your God, which is in your hand, and also to carry the silver and gold that the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, with all the silver and gold that you shall find in the whole province of Babylonia, and with the freewill offerings of the people and the priests vowed willingly for the house of their God that is in Jerusalem. With this money then, you shall with all diligence buy bulls, rams, and lambs, and their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and you shall offer them on the altar of the house of your God that is in Jerusalem. Whatever seems good to you and to your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do, according to the will of your God. The vessels that have been given you for the service of the house of your God, you shall deliver before the God of Israel, of Jerusalem, and whatever else is required for the house of your God, which it falls to you to provide, you may provide it out of the king's treasury. So we'll start with this first section. It's pretty typical standard, right? This is not our first chapter in Ezra. We've read this before. It's very similar to what Cyrus says. It's very similar to what Darius says. And here we have it again with Artaxerxes. I'm sending you, go, make the God really happy, use all of my money, and make it really, really happy. We talked about that last week, how cool it is. And weird it is that the sacrifices are funded by the Persians. That's I think it's cool. It's also real weird. It's funded by the Persians again here. All that wealth coming from the Gentiles and going to Jerusalem. We've got money coming from political power, the king and his counselors. We've got money coming from the province of Babylonia. We've got money also coming from the people and the priests who do not choose to go with. All of that then is being sent and is to be given when they arrive to care for the temple. Any questions or comments on any of that? Historically speaking, that phrase, the king and his 7 counselors, we have no Persian records of 7 counselors. However, in Esther, they're called 7 princes, and Herodotus says that there are 7 great families who hold immense political power. So, I mean, like, you guys read between the lines there. Like, I think we can kind of figure out that, yeah, these guys are there. Whether they hold official office or not, you kind of got to get their opinion. So, take it with a grain of salt, whatever you want to say there. All right, verse 21. I, Artaxerxes, the king, make a decree to all the treasurers in the province beyond the river. So notice now we're shifting. We've got Babylonia, which is that Mesopotamian region. That's the province where Ezra is going to be departing from. The province of Babylonia, back there in verse 16, is providing funds. Now it's the province beyond the river, which is from the Euphrates until the borders of Egypt, probably the Wadi al-Arish, we don't know. This is the instructions to those treasurers. Whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, notice the title again, scribe of the law of the God of heaven, requires of you, let it be done with all diligence, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt, without prescribing how much. Whatever is decreed by the God of heaven, let it be done in full for the house of the God of heaven. Lest his wrath be against the realm of the king and his sons, we also notify you that it shall not be lawful to impose tribute, custom, or toll on any one of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the doorkeepers, the temple servants, or other servants of this house of God. Okay, we'll stop there again. Directions to the treasurers beyond the river. Anything Ezra wants, give it to him. His political title is inserted again. Up to 100 talents of silver, wheat, wine, you can read the rest, oil, and so forth. And then as much salt as they want. Why is it so important that salt is included? I can accept a few answers for this, so don't be afraid, because there's quite a few reasons. It preserves things. Yeah, very important for people who probably don't have a lot of refrigeration. I mean, refrigeration in this time period means putting it underwater or inside of caves. Well, you're in the Middle East. You can find a cave, but not a lot of water. Okay, what else? They trade with it. At this time, salt's going to be worth more than the money you spent on it. So giving salt to somebody historically is payment and much more valuable than giving them coinage or something of that kind. We have the phrase today, a soldier whose worth is salt. There's a reason for that. It's because that's how they were paid. You get some salt, you can go do whatever you want with that and trade it wherever you want. It's going to be more valuable than getting the coinage of your king. So that's one of the reasons. What's another one? Think Law of Moses. Who remembers their Leviticus?
Had salt.
Every offering has to have salt. In fact, you cannot offer an offering without salt once they get into the land of Canaan, once they take the land. So it's pretty important. You're going to need a ton of it. Because, okay, yeah, you don't have to add a ton of salt, but every single time somebody brings an offering, there has to be salt involved. This is a massive financial contribution. Not just seasoning it for God, but financially you're contributing. All right, any comments on any of that? What is the penalty if someone beyond the river says, oh, you got to give us a tribute, you got to pay customs? Does it give one? Imprisonment? Yep. You guys remember what Darius said would happen? Yeah, we're going to take a beam out of your house and we're going to stick you on it. I can guarantee, knowing what we know about Artaxerxes historically, he would have been just fine with that answer as well. You cannot impose tribute. This again tells us the political position of Ezra, but it really tells us the political position of the God of heaven. Persia has a long-standing tradition for recognizing deities and giving their worshipers, their official worshipers, license to move goods from one location to another, and you cannot charge them taxes, you cannot charge them tribute. One of the great examples of this is Darius. When he gets up there into the Turkey region and he's coming across towards Greece, some of his generals begin to take tribute from the priests of Apollo, and Darius has them executed. You do not take from the gods if they're a true, recognized god by the Persian Empire. The God of heaven is. That does not mean that they worship God like they're supposed to. Don't misunderstand. They're polytheists. It's just another God, but he does seem to be one you need to pay attention to. Stuff happens around him in the Jerusalem area if you don't pay attention to him. Also kind of tells you the influence that people like Daniel or Ezra or even Esther have had on, or Mordecai have had on this political empire, that the God of heaven has continued to be elevated. Any thoughts on that? Anybody?
Interceding on behalf of the people, that, God, you really don't want to annihilate them. That's going to look bad because everybody knows what you did.
Yep, exactly right. Everybody knew what happened. And by and large, Babylonians and Persians understood it was their God who did it. They would have said because God loves Nebuchadnezzar, but still, move that aside. All right, which is a good argument because I think Isaiah might say the same thing. But anyways, I digress. Verse 25, and you, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God that is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges who may judge all the people in the province beyond the river, all such as know the laws of your God. And those who do not know them you shall teach. Whoever will not obey the law of your God, the law and the law of the king, let judgment be strictly executed on him, whether for death, for banishment, for confiscation of his goods, or for imprisonment. The Jews historically get very weird privileges. This is one of those times. Persia does not. We have no evidence of them giving this kind of directive to a group that is within their borders. To tell you, go set up your own judges according to your own standards, just make sure that they're also following the king's, but you have full reign to do whatever you need to do according to your own law, the law of the God of heaven. That's not common. People don't just do that. We see some of the issues with that in the New Testament because the Romans did the same thing. Weird again, but the Romans said the Jews have that freedom to govern themselves according to their own law as long as they also take care of the Romans. They take some of those freedoms away around the birth of Christ, namely that capital punishment piece, which means that he's not going to be beheaded, but instead he gets crucified at that point in time. Or he's not going to be stoned. He got crucified. So they take that part away. But notice again, that's not common. They don't just do that for their people. Nobody comes in and conquers you and says, oh, just do whatever you want. It's fine. They don't. They impose will. We can see that with the Greeks. When the Greeks come in and they attempt to take over Jerusalem especially, they begin to impose their will on them. They're building gymnasiums, they're building baths, they turn the temple of God into a temple of Zeus. Out of this comes the great Maccabean revolts and so forth and so on, which we'll probably talk about some towards the end of Nehemiah. But I just want to point out how weird this is, that Ezra is coming along and given full authority to appoint magistrates and judges. Any thoughts anybody has? Again, can you say and can you see the hand of God is on this? It's not normal. Yes?
Along those lines, because this is not too far after the time of Esther, right?
Right.
This is like the generation after, right?
Yeah.
Roughly, okay. So like the whole point of Esther is like the unseen God, because God's name is like not mentioned. You don't see worship of Yahweh in the book of Esther, and that's kind of like the point. And it's incredible how you see the echo of that here in Ezra of, like, we don't have any idea of specifically like what's happening with Artaxerxes and stuff, but it's like, this is not normal.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't happen like this. And a lot of the conquered people sure would have loved it. To be able to have such freedom as to punish in any way your law says? No, you don't do that. Can you just imagine if we conquered a nation and they're like, well, I mean, if you steal, we're going to cut your head off. And America's just like, oh, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But it's not even that. It's like if you step on a lizard, then you're unclean, and if you then try to go into the temple, you get stoned. We here in America would object to this, right? Persia says, that's fine. You can go ahead and do that. It's that kind of stuff. All right. Verse. Just to reemphasize, comparing verse 10 down here to this 25 through 26. Ezra's purpose, he set his heart to study the law, to do it, to teach it, and to establish rulership in Israel. That's exactly how Artaxerxes ends his letter. You are learned in this. Go and do it for the people who already know. Go and teach the people who do not know, and establish rulership in Jerusalem. It's not a wonder that just a few years down the line, people are going to write a letter to Artaxerxes and they're like, did you look up this city that you're allowing to be rebuilt? Did you read its history? Maybe you shouldn't do that. And then we've got Nehemiah coming. All right, let's finish the chapter. Blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who put such a thing as this into the heart of the king, to beautify the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem, and who extended to me his steadfast love before the king and his counselors and before all of the king's mighty officers. I took courage, for the hand of the Lord my God was on me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. So there's your summary. Chapter 8, we're going to get into who went, how they went, what it was like when they arrived, what their journey was like. And then in chapters 9 and 10, we're going to see Ezra purifying the people. So coming, teaching the law, and purifying. So that's the upcoming 3 weeks. Does anybody have any questions on Ezra 7? Comments or thoughts? Yeah.
27 and 28 almost sounds like a psalm. Like the way
Yeah.
it's written, it really almost sounds like a psalm of Artaxerxes.
It very well could be. Would not be out of character for this time period. Certainly when paired with some of the writings of Jeremiah and Isaiah, where some of those sections do appear to be songs of praise to Cyrus. All right. Let's see. Yep, that's everything I got on Ezra 7. Now we want to talk about the fun stuff, right? So during this time period, they begin to develop a concept called the way of the Amorite. Who is the Amorite? Nobody remembers the poor Amorites? Oh, that's okay. Nobody really needs to. So the Amorites are the people who live in Canaan that Moses specifically instructs Joshua to destroy. The Amorites, it's called the land of the Amorites, this whole middle section of Canaan region. But they don't, and a lot of them survive. And because of that, they keep some of their culture, they keep some of their sayings, and by the time that we get to this point, the way of the Amorite is just magic. That's just what it is. It's the superstition, it's the ritual thing, it's the if you do this, a effect will occur, and we don't really know why. That's what it's talking about. So they develop this section. Weirdly, the section that has the most amount of writing about it is in the middle of their Talmud section on the Sabbath. I don't know why. I'm not sure they know why. But that's where it gets plugged. There's also another little section that we'll take a look at towards the end if we've got enough time to make it to that slide. But that's what we're looking at. I do want to go to Leviticus 18 because Leviticus 18 is the anchor for all that we are about to discuss. So Leviticus 18 and verse 3, this is the evidence, this is the authority, this is the God-given right that they are going to build on to talk about the way of the Amorite. So Leviticus 18:3, it says, "You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt where you lived. You shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes." That's their anchor. Notice the land of Canaan, the land of the Amorite. That's just why. I don't know why they didn't call it the way of the Egyptian, but they don't. Maybe because Egypt kind of becomes an issue. Anyways, that's another historical discussion. So let's look at some of the things it says. We've got a lot of Talmud to read tonight. And I kind of want to break it down. Some of it will go a little bit quicker, some of it will go a little bit slower. But this is the beginning of the chapter. After some of the discussion of the ways of the Amorite, the Gemara cites additional statements from the Amorite chapter of the Tosefta, which is the precursor to the Talmud, and from other sources. One who says, "My fortune be fortunate, and be not weary by day or by night." Now, that doesn't mean anything to us. But fortunate is God or Gad Gaddy. And that phrase is what they're objecting to. So it loses a little bit in translation, because we just translate it as fortunate, but it means something different to them. You are referencing deity here. So that phrase, "My fortune be fortunate, Gad Gaddy, and be not weary by day or by night," that statement contains an element of the ways of the Amorite. So it is not Amorite. Everybody understand that change? But it is of the ways of the Amorite. Rabbi Yehuda, he says that is more severe than the ways of the Amorite, as Gad is nothing other than a term of idolatry, as it is stated in you, that forsake the Lord, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for Gad, and that offer mingled wine in full measure unto many, quoted out of Isaiah 65:11, Gad Gaddy is a form of prayer to an idol. So this is good luck, something we might say, good fortune, safe travels. That's the equation that is being made here. But 1,000 years ago, if somebody said good luck or good fortune, they're not always just meaning, I hope nice stuff happens to you. They might be meaning, I hope that the God of luck is involved in your journey. And that is what we're talking about here. You could look at Isaiah 65:11. That's exactly what it says, though if you've got an English translation, it probably translates Gad as fortune. So this is that encroaching Greek concepts, but this is also coming out of the paganism of Canaan and the paganism of Babylonia and Persia, and they're like, we got to do something about this, because these are common phrases that nobody thinks are bad, but they are, according to Tolbert, because of that last sentence. It is a form of prayer to an idol, whether you mean it or not. So you guys remember, I made a big deal, and I keep making a big deal, about the fact that the Jews are trying to develop an identity here. Who are we as a people? Because historically, we've had very mixed results in who we've been as a people. And now we're going to be monotheistic. We are going to separate us from the world. We are going to follow our God. We are going to be righteous, and God will never punish us again because we will be super righteous. The Talmud has to exist, and especially the Gemara, has to exist to try to be as careful as we possibly can to never come even near something that could be sinful. So that's what we're going to be discussing here tonight, and taking a look at some of the things that it says. One who requests that he be called by his wife's name and she be called by his name for good fortune, his request contains an element of the ways of the Amorite. Nobody can explain to me what kind of magical stuff's going on here. But if you call me Rachel and you call her Joshua, somehow that is fortunate. It is a ritual It is a spell. And it should not be in the mouth of a Jew. One who says, let my barrels be strengthened. Notice that phrase, danu dane, that contains an element of the way of the Amorite. Rabbi Yehuda says that is more severe than the way of the Amorite, as Dan is nothing other than a term of idol worship, as it is stated in Amos 8. They that swear by the sin of Samaria and say, as your God, Dan lives. So notice, to us, we're like, oh, let my barrels be strengthened. But in Hebrew, well, probably Aramaic, but could be Hebrew, it said danu danai, or dane. No, you can't say that. It's like us saying, I hope Zeus is with you. Can't really say that. And he says it's worse than the way of the Amorite, because not only are you doing something that's borderline magic, but you're also naming a god in the spell. One who hears a raven calling and is concerned about a bad omen. So he says to the raven, scream, and says to the female raven, whistle, and turn your tail to me for the best. Okay, this is omen reading. It's a way of the Amorite. This is so common. It is so common historically. I saw an eagle flying, and I knew it was going to be a good day. I saw 12 eagles flying, and I knew it was going to be a terrible day. That's way too much fortune looking down on me. Well, the Jewish response, the magical response that the Jews have learned from the Canaanites, the Persians, the Babylonians, and the oncoming Greeks is I scream out at the male ravens. At the female ravens, I scream out and I say, whistle and turn your tail to me for the best. Means fly away. Don't let a black cat cross your path. You guys heard that one? Slaughter this rooster that calls out in the evening, and says, slaughter this chicken that calls out like a male rooster. Those statements contain an element of the ways of the Amorites. How can you make sure that your fowl, your birds, are not going to be taken over by evil spirits? Well, if you got a rooster that crows in the evening, that is of the devil. You kill it. You got a chicken that calls out like a rooster, that is of the devil. You kill it to save the whole. But notice what we're talking about here. That's not necessarily magic, but it is the belief that something awful is coming. We might say fate. Fortune is probably the best word, because between the Roman and the Greek and the Babylonian and the Persian concepts of this god of fortune, it would have been everywhere. One who says, I will drink and I'll leave a little. I will drink and I'll leave over, so that his wine will increase. Greeks would have said, I tip a little out to the gods, and then I drink. It's the same concept. I'm going to leave a little bit because that means that gods will prosper me. One who cracks an egg on a wall and smears it in front of the chicks. You're trying to make them healthy. You're trying to make them fruitful, profitable, and protected from evil. So I take an egg and I crack it and I smear it on the walls to keep them safe. We can even see some Jewish concepts in here. God himself said, take a lamb and put its blood on the doorposts and on the lintel. What's its purpose? It's to keep everybody inside safe. Well, if that worked for humans, what if I use an egg? You can see the reasoning, but there's no foundation in practice. There's no evidence of it helping. Now, I'm starting to say that because we're going to get to the end of this chapter. You're going to see why that's important. One who stirs the pot in front of the chicks as an auspicious practice so they do not die. This is the idea of creating a brew in front of them and reading the brew to determine the future of the chicks. Seen Harry Potter? It's tea reading. A woman who dances and counts the chicks until she reaches the number of 71 chicks so that they do not die. Her action contains an element of the ways of the Amorite. Lucky number. It's still something we have today, right? Yeah.
Deal with, in all of this, did they ever deal with what Jacob did with Laban's flock? Because we don't see that God instructed him to do that. We also can't really understand what he did in any scientific means.
Ask me that question 2 slides from now, because I think I can answer it using the rationality of the Talmud, but I want you guys to hear it first. So don't let me forget, because it was fantastic. A woman who dances to ensure that the kuta, a spice made from whey, salt, and bread, that she is preparing will be successful, and a woman who silences bystanders to ensure that the lentils will cook properly, and a woman who screams to ensure that the pearl barley will cook properly. All of this is an element of the way of the Amorite. What are we getting at? We're getting at, in order for it to be done correctly, you have to have a right environment. So everybody needs to be really quiet, or the porridge won't set. If you scream or make a lot of noise in the home, dinner will be ruined and mom will be very mad. Or mom has to do a dance to make sure that the spices go together the way that they're supposed to. And come, children, let's all dance together. Remember, last year? When did I do my lesson on Inanna? Last year, I think. So looking at the gods of the Babylonians, that was last year. Part of the worship of Inanna, the goddess of heaven, the queen of heaven, is the making of cakes. They were made in a specific a specific style. There were specific molds for it. And the scriptures say that the father gives hearty approval, and the wife and the children gleefully make the cakes. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about worshiping an idol and not even thinking anything about it. This is exactly what Ezra is coming back to purify. In 2 chapters, when we're talking about Ezra coming in and making people divorce, it's because of things like this, where you've allowed someone to come into your home that believes that this is real, and your kids are going to learn it, whether you want them to or not. And my favorite one, everybody ready for this? A woman who urinates in front of her pot so it will cook quickly. Any of you ladies ever tried that? Sunday afternoon, the preacher's coming, it's a gospel meeting, and the dinner won't finish. I'll just pee in front of it. You get to say such fun things when teaching Bible class. There you go. It's a secret. Give it a try, right? It contains a way of the Amorite. Now this chapter shifts, and it says, well, hold on a second. Some of the things we do work. How does that make any sense? And so this is how they're answering. This is Landon's question here. One can put a chip of mulberry wood and shards of glass in the pot so it will cook quickly, as doing so is effective and not merely superstition. What are they saying? They're like, if you put it in, we can see it actually does something. That's not magic. That's just life. Some of the other religions of the world would argue with them and say that there is magic, but this is how they're distinguishing. Is there scientific evidence? They don't have that word, but us looking back historically, that's what they're wanting. If I do it, does it work every time? If I smear an egg on the chicken coop, are the chickens okay every single time? No. So that can't be right, has to be magic, has to be superstition, has to be something of an idol, something of the pagans, something of the Gentiles. But putting a chip of mulberry wood and shards of glass in the pot, that does work. However, the rabbis prohibit shards of glass not due to superstition, but because of the danger involved. I love that. I love that historically this was written down, that people are like, please don't put glass in your food, it's real dangerous. But they had to address it. Sages also taught in the Tosefta, one may place a lump of salt into a candle and it will burn brightly. This is effective and not merely for good fortune, so there is no element of the way of the Amorites involved. Similarly, one may put mud or clay under a candle so it will burn longer. It's not for fortune, it's not for mysticism, it has evidence, it works every time, therefore it's a natural thing given to us by God. So, Landon's question. Jacob put some rods in front of sheep, and stuff happened. Stuff happened consistently. That would make it effective, right? Which would make it not superstition, but instead an act of God. That's why I made us wait. I think that's how the Gemara would argue it. But no, I don't know of a passage in there where they specifically take a look at it. Last one I want to look at, I got a couple more. Rav Zutra said, "He who covers an oil lamp or uncovers a kerosene lamp for no purpose violates the prohibition. Do not destroy, since by doing so the fuel burns more quickly." So now we're looking at some periphery things. If you are doing things to your lamp for good fortune, no, you can't do that because there's a prohibition, don't destroy. I can't find where the prohibition, don't destroy is, so evidently that's been destroyed. One who says, well, drinking wine and life to the mouth of the sages does not fall into the category of the way of the Amorites, because Rabbi Akiva did this at the banquet of his son. He kept doing it. They drank a cup, and every time he said it, so that can't be wrong. I love that argument, too. It can't be wrong. I like that guy. And the last one is out of Chulin 4. This is, you cannot take the unborn calf, miscarriage, placenta, mother killed before giving birth. You can't take the child and bury it at an intersection or hang it on a tree as a way to prevent other animals from miscarrying. That is a way of the Amorite, and you can't do that. So, these are the things that they're having to deal with. These are the arguments that the Jews are having to have in order to figure out who they are and how they're going to be separate from the world. If you look at early Christian history, it's pretty similar. And we had to figure out the same thing. All right, that's it for tonight. Go away.